Welcome back to Bits of a Tangent. Gianluca here. It's been a little while, folks, but as I've been teasing on Twitter and Instagram, there are a bunch of new episodes in the works, and I'm so glad to be back to bring you the first of those, my conversation with the incredible Kat Woods. Jared and I would love to fill you in on the exciting things we've been working on here in London, but instead of going into that now, I want to jump right into this episode. Kat Woods is an effective altruist and the co-founder of Nonlinear, which incubates long-termist nonprofits by connecting founders with ideas, funding, and mentorship. Before that, she co-founded Charity Entrepreneurship, an open full-funded near-termist charity incubator, which has launched 18 charities so far, including Fortify Health, Fish Welfare Initiative, Family Empowerment Media, and Training for Good. Kat also co-founded Charity Science Health, now Savita, which helped increase the vaccination rates of over 200,000 children in India. A couple weeks ago, Kat was in the UK, so I traveled to Oxford to record a conversation with her. Now, effective altruism, or EA as we refer to it throughout the episode, has been in the news a lot lately and is a hot topic on Twitter. For those who haven't come across it, effective altruism is a philosophy and community that is focused on maximizing the good you can do through your career, projects, and donations. It has seen such tremendous growth in membership and funding over the past few years and is having a dramatic impact on the world. I'll pop some helpful links in the show notes, and I encourage you all to check it out. One reason I wanted to meet with Kat was because of all the work she has done in EA and the future initiatives she's working on with Nonlinear. I think it's really important to hear from people actively working on reducing suffering and promoting flourishing in the world, especially ones as optimistic and inspiring as Kat. She's also a high-performing operator, automation wizard, and digital nomad. So essentially the Tim Ferriss of EA, but with way better hair. In this episode, we discuss how Kat came to be empathetic and discover EA, whilst also having goals in agency, brain hacks for curing imposter syndrome, boosting confidence, and being more agentic, how to save the world and be happy at the same time, why you don't need permission to do things, Infohazards, the simulation argument as a powerful motivator, the idea of passive impact via automation, and the projects that Kat is currently working on, which include the Nonlinear Library, EA Houses, the Nonlinear Support Fund, as well as the Bounty Program, and an EA Idea Market. I really loved meeting face-to-face and exploring all these ideas with her. I can't wait for you all to hear this. So, with no further ado, here's the episode of Bit of a Tangent. The thing that is particularly interesting about you for me is how you seem to have this strong element of empathy and caring and that whole EA side. And it comes through not just in the global sense, but like the more personal sense. But then you also are very agentic and functional and like quite utilitarian, and you get shit done in the world, and how you reconcile those and the interesting interfaces between them and like the tools that have come out of that. And I'm particularly interested to chat with you about. With Nonlinear and with the work you've done before that, you're obviously very much involved in actually taking those feelings and intuitions and bringing them to life in the world. So yeah, I'm curious when did you realize that you felt things very strongly and had very high levels of empathy and compassion? And when did you figure out how to use that in a productive way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like I actually wasn't very empathetic until about the age of 12. Okay. I feel like before then, I was like, I don't know, I felt like almost like sociopathic. I wasn't sociopathic. I was just a child. But
yeah. But you feel that way, yeah.
Yeah, but as a child, I feel like children are generally actually kind of a little sociopathic, honestly.
Yeah.
And it was really like around the age of 12, and I've looked into this, and apparently this is actually when your like prefrontal cortex starts like really developing. And that was actually when I basically developed empathy. All of a sudden I really started caring about other people and being able to like see how they were feeling. And it also at the same time is when I started becoming obsessed with like planning. which is another part of like the PFC or prefrontal cortex. It's like this like planning thing. And like I just became obsessed with to-do lists. I read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Preteens or something.
I did not know that existed, but of course it does. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh yeah, I should actually have goals. And then like I just started having goals for everything. I would have goals for, I was not very good at having fun in a certain sense. It was fun for me, but I would like tell my friends, I'm like, we're at like this, like at the ocean and there's like a dock and I'm like, let's have the goal of jumping off the dock 100 times. And they're like, no. And so I just did it and checked it off each time. Yeah. And so I became obsessed with having goals and I became obsessed with helping people. And my first like proper cause area was I had read I just pulled this book off the bookshelf on my mom's bookshelf, and it was a book about farming, and I thought it was about going to be like Old MacDonald had a farm kind of stuff. Yeah. And it was about factory farming. And by the end of the first chapter, I was a vegetarian. Wow. By the end of the book, I was a very annoying vegetarian. I would just go in. I had no idea what was going on. Like I really thought that people just didn't know. And that I came in the next day to school and I was thinking, oh, I just have to tell everybody. And then everybody will become vegetarian because they just don't know. Yeah. As you can imagine, that did not go how I thought it was going to. This is actually like a really important wake-up call for me. I actually think it's really important for somebody to have like, I think that part of I'm a much more understanding person given my level of like moral emotions. Like I tend to get really upset about things. Like I was really upset for a while at humanity. Like at every lunchtime when people had like a salami sandwich, I would just cry for at least like 5 minutes. Right. And don't have very many friends left from that period of time.
That would polarize them pretty quickly.
Yeah. But I had to go through this period of actually like being around people who I completely morally disagreed with. Yeah. And I had to learn how to still have friends.
And still function.
And that was actually really important. So nowadays, like when everybody's getting so polarized in the universe or whatever, like I'm just like a lot more like, oh, I can understand where you're coming from. If this is the first time you had like a big moral emotion and you disagree with people, like it can be really hard to not be really angry and to like, push everybody away. Exactly. I think it's really important to just like get that. So that was like one of my first cause areas. My actual first cause area was spiders.
Spiders?
Yeah, because that was extreme suffering. Right? Like I would see people go and murder them for no reason. They were like, they're just being murdered because they were ugly.
Yeah, because people were afraid of just the way they looked and felt and generally behaved.
Exactly. And I'm from Canada. There's like pretty much no poisonous spiders in Canada. Right. Like there's the black widow, but that's like really easily identifiable. You never see them.
Exactly.
So I would just go and save them and everything. And I've always been like much more compelled by like extreme suffering than like just regular suffering. I'm actually terrible at like helping people like do the dishes or something. This is something I have to like force myself to do. Okay. And I'm like, I know this is rational. This is the right thing to do. But like extreme suffering is like, oh man, like I can't not act. So it was animal rights. Then I read a book when I was 14 about climate change. And that was like, again, like I immediately was like, oh, I care. I have to do something. And so I just like gave up paper towel and flying and different degrees of impact there. But, and then people said, oh, Kat, if you care about these things, you're going to care about global poverty. And I was like, la, don't tell me. I don't want to hear it. Because if I hear about it, I'm going to care.
And you then have to do something.
Exactly. Wow. So I just kind of ignored it for a while, and I tried to like just not learn about anything new in the world. Yeah. I'd already given up bacon. I'd already given up paper towel. What more did people want from me? Exactly. And then around the age of 20, I ended up accidentally watching a documentary about global poverty, and I cared.
You knew it would happen. It was just a matter of time.
And I knew I had to do something. And then that was actually like, I basically independently thought of the drowning child argument because I saw in that moment that me avoiding thinking about it was the same, like I could have been doing something to help all that time and I hadn't. And I felt that deeply. I just felt this guilt of like, wow, I could have been doing something I didn't. And then I realized I should just spend the next while trying to understand. I realized I had a moral obligation to understand all of the problems in the world and look at them and then try and figure out what was the best thing to do. So I spent about a year. All my spare time was spent learning about all the problems in the world, so I could figure out how best to help. It was not very fun to be around during that year.
That's a brutal undertaking, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it wasn't great. Every single little thing reminded me of all the things that were wrong with the world. At the time, I was still focused on this like idea of I have to reduce the amount of suffering I cause. I can't cause any harm. Like my main thing was do no harm. Yeah. And then I met Joey, who ended up being my husband and co-founder for a bunch of things, now he's my ex-husband, and he said to me, he's like, hey, instead of doing no harm, have you considered just reducing harm in the world?
Right.
And the moment he said it, I was like, oh yeah, this makes 100% sense.
So that was the click. That was the moment when it went from altruism to like effective altruism, where it became about not just your own harm limitation, but about just minimize harm in general.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he also came from this is all before EA, or at least we'd heard about it. I think it had maybe just started existing.
Yeah,
this is 2011.
A little noise about it, yeah.
Yeah, and then he also was like, oh hey, have you considered applying science to altruism? Again, the moment I heard it, like some people take a while to be convinced.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, duh.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you? Like, that makes so much sense. And he had originally heard this from GiveWell, I think, is kind of where like the idea had come from. And then, and so then we actually were trying to build a movement called the Scientific World Changers. So when we discovered EA, it was just like, oh, it already exists. Excellent. Yeah. We don't have to do this.
Precisely. Yeah, I mean, I think that was, I definitely had a similar experience as well in my undergraduate kind of years when I started just looking at, because I came from this computer science background, but I also had some genetics thrown in there. And so I would, be exposed to like these biological problems, and disease and death and all forms of suffering there that you could fix. But the way we treat them in hospitals is individual cases, whereas I had this CS approach of why don't we just scale up the things that we know can work. And so I'd always had this intuition. And so the first time I came across EA and was just like, oh, we're going to use spreadsheets to make our altruism more effective. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. Other people actually get it too. And from then on, it was just immensely compelling. And then that was, the rest is kind of history of just becoming more and more involved in the movement and the things about it. So yeah, it seems like you had a very similar experience, but you literally started something, had a name for it and everything, and then ended up realizing that this was perfectly aligned with what EA was doing as a movement.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
No, and EA is just wonderful. Like, I still love it. I think it was Rob Miles. I was talking to him. We were both talking to somebody who didn't know EA, and he said, "Oh, I originally came for the cause area, but I stayed for the people." And
that's really interesting. Yeah, because he's very big in AI safety.
Yeah.
And that was always his direction. And so that's interesting that the community around it. And just like-minded people who care about things, because I think that's a critical component.
Yeah, because most people just don't care. Like, I used to really think that, people care, they just don't know. And that's true for some people, but most people, they just don't care.
Yeah.
Even if they know about it, like they can watch Earthlings, they can watch like the most horrific factory farming videos ever, and then eat a burger right afterwards.
Yeah.
And like it's like, okay.
It's an interesting thing. How much of that do you think is like an emotional shielding response versus they actually don't care? It's like a defense mechanism. Because for a lot of people, I think if they feel that if they open themselves up to caring about things, then every homeless person who they saw asking for change and every opportunity to eat a meal and everything would just make them so miserable and overwhelmed. Like, do you think that there's just a defense mechanism that kicks in for most people?
Well, so I think it's just going to be one of those things where it's always just a percentage of the population is like that. So there's some percentage is a defense mechanism. There's some percentage where they just don't care. Like there's a whole spectrum of caring, right? And so some people are sociopaths and they just genuinely don't care. They might not even be capable of caring, right? And that's the extreme end. And then you're going to have and a lot of EAs are going to fall in this category of extreme caring. And then you're going to have people in the middle and So some people are self-defend, but I empathize, I get that.
Yeah.
But also, people should work on that. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you don't want to end up giving away everything. But most people are not at risk of that.
Yeah, not even close. It's just there is probably still a little bit of that. People just don't know or don't know that there are ways you can do this reliably, like earning to give, or, I don't even have time so I can to charities. Oh, you can, there's literally people out there who figure out the most optimal charities to donate to, and you just give them your money, and that's the problem solved.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a little bit of information there still. But yeah, it's probably, there's a full spectrum of that. And I think there's also a danger with sort of EA types to almost get consumed by the caring, where it can go the other extreme, where you become less effective because the caring is ratcheted up so far. And you're probably a rare exception of a person where you immediately took on the self-sacrifice, from very young age. When chapter 1 you decided you became vegetarian, that's very bold, and that's, I would say, very rare in people to have that kind of rapid update and then take on a personal sacrifice in that way. So do you think it's also, there's something in you that makes you prone towards self-sacrifice?
It's an interesting question. So I think maybe there's some things. So I think, okay, so one is just the extremeness of my emotional reactions.
Okay.
So I'm a very not to break, I'm a very deliberate person.
Yeah.
Right. Where I tend to really one of my foundational things is Kat does things for reasons.
Yes.
I don't just do it randomly. Most people are bumbling around. I'm very deliberate. But by the same token, I also have very, very strong emotional reactions to things, especially moral things.
Right.
If I see extreme suffering, I feel it in such a way that I can't possibly not act. It would be crazy not to. It would be imagine you saw your own sibling or your own mom drowning. Of course you're going to help. It doesn't even occur to you that you could not.
Right.
And so I just have that for everybody as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I actually have it less for my family than most people, but I have it more for the world in general.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And it's so it's one of those things where, so I think it's the emotional reaction that's very strong, combined with I have very strong self-efficacy in the sense of I feel like I can do most things that I want to do. And so I think for some people they might have the strong emotional reaction, but they're what can I do? And then I have the strong emotional reaction. I'm oh, what can I do? What are the things I can do?
It's literally just the intonation that makes the whole difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you actually go and do those things, more importantly.
Yeah.
Because I think there are a lot of people that are in that intermediate ground of okay, I see this terrible thing and I feel horrible about it, and these things that one might do about them, and they can generate those ideas, but then it doesn't really go any further. Just like most startup ideas just die in the idea stage.
Yeah.
And then you've had multiple successes with going and doing that and actually bringing about change in the real world in a very tangible and measurable and undeniable way. And I'm really curious there, and I think a lot of people are going to be interested in that perspective. How did you go from, okay, I want to do something, there are things I can do, to actually doing the things?
Yeah, this is actually a question that I have for other people. I don't so I've been trying to understand it myself of what makes me different, because it doesn't feel like it's special, but I do notice that other people aren't doing it.
Right,
and so I'm okay. And that's one of those things where that's actually a sign, when you're good at something, it doesn't feel like you're good at it. It feels like
everyone else is terrible. Exactly.
Yeah, and you're why are they terrible at this?
Yeah.
I don't understand, just do it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I do feel like there is a little bit of that. I think most people are kind of waiting for permission. They're waiting for a structure that lets them do that. And you don't need permission. In fact, when I started my first charity, 80,000 Hours posted a post saying that we shouldn't start it and why it was bad.
Wow.
But then Ali Hassenfeld, one of the co-founders of GiveWell, saw it and left a comment saying, hey, I'm really excited about this. You guys should go move forward.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
And we did it anyways. We weren't oh, somebody thinks we shouldn't do it. It's there's always going to be some people. In fact, especially in EA.
Yeah.
EAs can't agree on anything.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes me feel better whenever I get a criticism online is I'm Holden gets criticized.
Yeah.
Constantly. And he's the best person.
And super thoughtful, goes into every detail about things. And yeah, so part of that is probably a pro. It's not that it's a bug, it's a feature, because that level of critical thinking and challenging ideas is what helps you move towards the truth. And I think EAs are the vast majority are people who think truth seeking is incredibly important as an intrinsic value.
Exactly.
As well as having high empathy.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's if you get sufficiently large or public, you will always have criticism, no matter what you do. Try and think of I don't know, even just all the people we think of as heroes. Gandhi was so hated, he got assassinated. Same with Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
And pretty much every single moral hero ever. Almost none of them die natural deaths. I'm hoping that doesn't happen with me, but...
Yeah, you maybe need to up your security as things scale up.
Yeah. But in terms of getting things done and actually just doing things, so this is actually an interesting thing. I've been trying to break down what it means to be agentic.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's two underlying features of it. So one is seeing that there's many, many options. So I think most people only see the options that are put in front of them, right?
Okay.
They're like, oh, there are jobs. These are slots that you can be put into, right? But there's so many other things you can do that are not jobs, right? So like seeing that there are many options. And then the other thing is, like the self-efficacy, the thinking that I can do this and actually like doing it, right? And for self-efficacy, I think you can deliberately build that up. It's just basically building up confidence. There's a lot of things you can do there. I mean, there's tons of books. What were some books that I found really useful? I think there was it's like 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem or something.
Okay.
But then there's also I actually had imposter syndrome up until about 5 months ago.
Wow.
And I got rid of it finally. Woohoo!
Wow. Yeah. That's a big thing.
Yeah. And I had tried everything. I tried meditating. I tried CBT, ACT, IFS, all the acronyms.
Everything.
Reason, that definitely didn't work.
Okay.
But basically what I figured out is I did a combination of, so I did loving kindness meditation, but towards myself.
Okay.
And so loving kindness meditation, for those who aren't familiar with it, or at least this is one iteration of it, which is that you think of somebody who it's really easy to feel loving kindness towards. You generate that feeling. Then you think of somebody who it's slightly less easy to feel loving kindness towards, but you maintain that same level of emotion towards that person. And if you lose that emotion and it starts getting less, then you just go back to the easy person, reestablish it, and then go back down.
Yeah.
And then you think of somebody slightly less, and then you get to neutral people, and then you get to negative people, and then you get to like the hardest people, and it's like Hitler or yourself, whichever's harder for you.
Which is quite a contrast there. But I think that's true for a lot of people. Certainly for myself, I think I'm my own like harshest critic. I mean, I hold myself to ridiculous standards, and I'm so forgiving of other people. Yeah. And that's always like a difficult thing to reconcile. So I had a similar experience with I think it's like Metta, the loving kindness meditation. Yeah. And I would the breakthrough for me then was imagining myself as a child, because it's so easy to feel compassion towards that child who's essentially innocent, and they make mistakes and you just forgive them and it's no harm, and then to slowly kind of scale that up into a teenager and then into a young adult and then into who I am now. So it's a really interesting technique. And so that for you was what made the huge difference in the last 5 months? Yeah, so it was that, and I did an hour a day for a week of self-love meditation, essentially. And funnily enough, I actually also iterated into like thinking of myself as younger, except like I went all the way back to a baby, and I still couldn't love myself as a baby. I was a chunky baby. Can't love chunky babies, obviously. No, they're actually the cuter ones. I don't know why I have that feeling. The cherubs. It's fine as long as it's other babies, not me, obviously. Right. But finally, what it was able for me to get through was to think of myself as my mom holding me as a baby. Interesting. And I was like, well, my mom definitely loved me, and that was how I was able to kind of like get in. So I started doing that, self-love, and then also, so the interesting thing about love and kindness meditation is my insight was that you can just cross-apply this to any emotion. Like the same general technique can work for any emotion you want. This idea of transferring it over from one case to another, but maintaining the intensity and Exactly. And so I call that like generally like emotion practice. Okay. And then for imposter syndrome, what I did is I cross-applied it to like I call it confidence practice. Right. And so what you do is you imagine, and so like you can kind of break down confidence into a bunch of different subcomponents. Okay. But for me, like the big things were like there's an element of loving kindness, right? There's an element of believing in yourself, and then there's an element of believing in yourself even if you make mistakes. And so those were like the 3 main things for me. And then what I did is I would imagine, so you could imagine something that you feel those things for towards yourself already, if you have those. For me, what worked best is I thought of my sister, and like I really believe in her. Even if she makes mistakes, I'm not like, well, fuck you, I hate you now. Yeah. Like, and obviously loving kindness, lots there. The other thing that I did is think of, I kind of imagined like being like a Dumbledore talking to Harry Potter, but like I just switched the genders to female just because it fit with me. Better, yeah. Okay. In terms of like, I'm imagining I'm this old wise woman who's like talking to this 11-year-old who I know is like super powerful and going to do great things, and like they're still making mistakes. They're 11. Right. Like you're not thinking like, man, you're going to save everything now. You're just going to survive first year. Exactly. And so what I'll do is I'll imagine being the old wise woman talking to this younger one, and at first I imagine feeling like proud of them and like believing in them when they're doing something well. Okay. And then I imagine them messing up in some way, and then loving them anyways and thinking still that they're great. And then I cross apply that to
all the other areas of my life. So I'm generating this feeling, and then and I actually don't like do like the slow leveling down thing. I just kind of think of what is my target thing and then try and get there. And yeah, so it'll be like, oh hey, like it'll be like, oh hey, I put this post up and then somebody left a comment that made me feel bad, right? And I'll imagine that, but then feel confident.
Right.
And then still feel loving kindness or whatever. I'll think like, oh, like fundraising, like that's always a thing that's like a bit scarier, right? And then I'll just imagine doing that, but feeling this like love, confidence, like, you know, I believe in you, even if you don't mess up this, there's like, I still believe in you kind of thing.
Amazing.
Yeah, and doing it for my to-do list, that was super good. And so
doing it for your to-do list? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I would look at my, like what I had to do that day. And then feel like I believe in myself, I can do this.
Oh, I see.
Even if I mess up, because like a lot of times like I'll have like anxiety about one of them. I'll be like, no, what if I mess this up?
Yeah.
And then I'll think, oh, if I do mess it up, I'll still believe in myself and I'll still love myself. And also I believe in myself. I'm pretty sure I can handle this. I've handled a lot of stuff like this before.
Right, okay.
And yeah, so I just did that for like about an hour a day for a couple weeks. And I went from like a 3 out of 10 confidence to a 9 out of 10.
Which is, those are results. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I stopped doing it regularly, and it kind of went back to like, now it's stabilized at a 6 or a 7 out of 10. And so I'm thinking I might like start doing it again more often or something, but still like, hey, that was like 5 months ago and I haven't had to maintain it. And that's like another thing. I'm always trying to, so I have, I should probably mention just for the listeners, but so I have this like, I try and make everything passive in the sense of passive income, where passive income is where you do an initial investment and then with little to no ongoing maintenance, it still brings you in money. So like the classic examples are being a landlord and collecting rents, or investing in the stock market in like an index fund or something. And this idea of passiveness, you can apply to anything. And so I apply it to impact, but I also apply it to happiness. Like, I don't want to have to, like, so people often say with meditation, they're like, oh, I'm part of like a really standard pitch is they'll say, oh, if you try and get worldly success or money or whatever, you're happy for a bit and then you're unhappy again.
Yeah, the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah,
idea.
And they say like, oh, that's why you should meditate. But then you still have to meditate every day. And if you stop meditating, it stops working.
Right. Okay.
Even the Dalai Lama still meditates every day.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get as good as the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
Fuck that shit. I don't want it.
Exactly.
Sorry, am I allowed to swear on here?
You can say whatever you
Excellent.
want. Yeah.
So I'm trying to look for things that are passive happiness, where I can just do it once and it just maintains that for a long time. And that's what I liked about this confidence practice, is I feel like I was just able to do it regularly for a bit. Like an hour a day for 2 weeks is a lot.
Okay, yeah,
but I don't have to do it anymore.
So there was a large upfront amount of work that you did that you then get this long tail of benefits from, as opposed to having to constantly reinforce it. And if you forget a day, it's like completely fall off the bandwagon.
Exactly.
That's really powerful. I mean, you literally there created a new technique of kind of like instrumental rationality, just by taking something you knew worked in one area and adapting it to another way and personalizing to yourself. That's a really powerful thing. And almost no one is doing this. Like even amongst sort of seasoned rationalists, I find a lot of people don't have examples of where they've done that. And I really struggle to explain to people when I do things like that, like to make sense of this concept that you can just develop tools that make your own thinking better.
Yeah.
And that on the margin is so much more valuable than just being slightly smarter or knowing slightly more, because like the actual operating system that you're running. I mean, if you're a 9 out of 10 confidence versus a 3, that's going to make such a huge impact, especially when you're doing things that have potentially unbounded upside, like getting funding, making huge contributions to the world. Like that is invaluable, and it costs you a few hours a week upfront, and that's amazing.
Yeah. And so I really think other people should really try, like, and I totally agree. And I think that confidence is one of those things where it's like, that's like one of the, I suppose it's like not the only thing, but it's like a huge part of being high agency is having the confidence to do it. Like I think a lot of people will think of it and then just not do it because they're like, oh, who am I to do these things? I can't do it. And so really developing it, because it's like, it opens up so many opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise ever look at. So
you legitimately trained your mind and your personality to have different default set points to what you had before. You exercised emotions using these tools so that they could get stronger. It's like if you were going to run a marathon but you're out of shape, you would train first. You effectively did that, but for your confidence. which allows you now to be more agentic, which is like, that is I love that as an analogy and as a way of approaching it. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, and that's actually one of my underlying things. So I used to say that I had a meditation practice.
Okay.
But then I started calling it actually my happiness workout routine.
Oh, and that's a good switch, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that meditation is just one of the ways to be happier. And like my main thing, I think that part of the reason why meditation works is that you practice it regularly. I think this is actually like one of the underlying key things. I bet if you did that for tons of other emotional techniques, it would also make you a happier person.
Like when people kind of just start any diet, they generally get into like slightly better shape or lose some fat, because it's just sticking to anything at all just makes you more consistent and mindful.
Yeah, and like a lot of things do work. They just they only work if you're doing it.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
And so if you call it a happiness workout, then it also can include things like journaling, internal family systems, memory reconsolidation, all sorts of things. CBT. CBT is also one of those things that like works a lot of the time, right? And you just have to actually practice it, and you don't need to wait for a therapist to get you to do these things.
Yeah, I think I mean that's one that's particularly the people that kind of read Less Wrong or are adjacent to the EA community will be familiar with this notion that you can learn about all of these cognitive biases and distortions and then just notice yourself doing them. But like, there are definitely blind spots there, and that's where it's helpful to talk to other people who are also aware of what those failings in critical reasoning look like, so that they can call you out, because it's way easier to spot in others. But you effectively can just do CBT on yourself, and I also think that that's way more effective for the most part if you're a critical thinker. And you can self-reflect, because you're able to, most people who've read, say, the Less Wrong sequences can argue their way out of any standard like CBT process, because they can just think of all of these edge cases and caveats and like epistemic failings, and and they're like, well, what if we look at this from a Bayesian perspective? And then it becomes just another navel-gazing game. But when you're doing it to yourself, it's very hard to fool yourself.
Exactly. And then you can find, like, I think the key thing with CBT and like challenging beliefs is you have to find a challenge to the belief that you buy. Yeah, and like most therapists, like they're lovely people, they're very high EQ, but they're not, it doesn't filter very much for high IQ. And so they're just not going to be able to convince you of it, but you can definitely convince yourself.
I mean, rationalist types are very much in like a minority in terms of general population, and then particularly the ones that are more of the EA persuasion, where it's much more empathy and maybe social awareness and things like that. That's a very small subset of people, so it wouldn't make sense for like most CBT practitioners, like clinically, to be optimized for that. So it's very much a roll your own type thing within the community, which I think is really, really valuable. You mentioned earlier the analogy when you were doing the loving kindness of having like Harry being spoken to by Dumbledore. Was that kind of top of mind? Did you read Methods of Rationality? Was that
No, it was, I have read Methods of Rationality, and I love that book. Amazing. It's mostly just like, I feel like Dumbledore is one of my, like, I would describe him as my aspirational spirit animal.
Interesting. Was that before reading Methods of Rationality, just from like the canon Harry Potter?
Yeah, canon Harry Potter. Definitely not. I don't think like Dumbledore in Methods of Rationality is not super smart, is he? I forget.
Well, spoilers if you're listening. I think everyone who will listen to this podcast has read it already. But he's very much acting like an idiot the whole way through. But there's twists at the end that reveal that he was playing a level higher at many points along the story. Yeah. But it doesn't come through the majority of the time. Quirrell comes across as a much more smart and effective rationalist type agent, although very cold and uncaring and merciless, which is the total opposite to what we aspire to be. And I think that's where the Harry counterbalance comes in there, because he's very emotional and empathetic.
So canon Dumbledore I really like, because he's a combination of, he's very altruistic, he cares a lot, but he also has a good time. Like, he's having a fun time. He's not like, I feel like I posted recently, I was asking, does anybody have examples of balanced heroes? Where like they care and they do altruistic things, but they also have like self-care and like are happy. And because like I feel like most of the time like the heroes are just like, let's sacrifice everything. Or they're like overly selfish and they have to like learn to be more altruistic, right? And so you actually, Tony Stark kind of goes in both directions. Like I feel like Tony Stark at the beginning was way too selfish, and then at the end, like also spoilers for Avengers Endgame. So Tony Stark's story in that I watched it when I was feeling super burnt out.
Okay.
Like, I was like, oh, like altruism is too much, like giving too much and everything. And Tony Stark starts off by being totally burnt out. He's like, half the world's dead, and like it's because he failed. And he's just like, fuck it, I'm gonna go into the woods and become an independent researcher. And I was like, that sounds so appealing. That's my dream
That's
too.
Your thing, yeah.
Yeah. And then he does do that. And then of course, like, you know, he gets the hero's call, like later on, they're like, hey, no, we need you. And he's like, but I'm happy. And you guys are gonna make me unhappy. And then I forget exactly what happened, but they basically said like, no, you can be happy too and save the world. And I was like, wow, that's so good. Oh my God, this is gonna be
a really good message, yeah.
Yeah. And then he fucking dies. He sacrifices his entire life to save the world. And I'm all like, that's very nice for regular people to see this story. But for me, that totally destroyed me. I like hated that movie afterwards. I was like, wow. Because like I was thinking like, oh yeah, maybe I can have both. Exactly. And then he dies. But anyways, like I'm actually still like, now I'm trying to like figure out like how do you actually be balanced? How do you help the world and also be happy at the same time? Which is like, tricky thing.
It's very challenging. I mean, a big thing that I always struggled with was like the guilt aspect of that. And then a friend of mine was like, oh, hey, you should read this series of blog posts that written by Nate Soares from Miri. And I read it and it resonated so hard. Like it helped me so much that I ended up reaching out to Nate and was like, can I just narrate the audio version of this so that more people will listen to it? Because it was that impactful to me. And like things like that, just trying to find the balance between how to take care of yourself so that you don't burn out or just become overwhelmed by the emotion, all the things you could be working on and feel like you ought to be. And at the same time, also, you know, not just enjoying life and doing nothing about the world around you. And like, that's a really hard balance to strike. And I think I'd put that up there in like the top risks to EA type people or people involved in the community and actually actively doing things as the major thing you have to be concerned with defending yourself against. Yeah. No, it's hard. And so far my solution right now is just so I tend to think of you can think of altruism, like your altruism levels, as it were, as like what percentage of all of your resources do you give to other people versus yourself. Right.
And like all resources includes like money, but also time, energy, emotions, all that. And I think like for my first 8 years in EA, I was like a 90% altruist or like a 95%. I was trying to get to 99.
Yeah.
And now I'm more of like a 50 or 60%. And interestingly though, for that, it's not because of burnout. It's because, so like I did a whole bunch of looking into what causes burnout. And actually one of the things is it's less to do with the number of hours you work. As opposed to, like, there's a bunch of different things. Like burnout, just like depression, can be caused by a bunch of different things. Yeah. There's not going to be like one true cause of burnout. But one really common one is the feeling that what you're doing isn't working. And it was funny, you said earlier, like, oh yeah, you have all these clear, unambiguous signs of success. And like, I actually look at my past and I'm like, I don't know, I was good at the intermediate metrics. Right. But I have no idea if they were actually good in like overall, actually.
Because you can't be inside other people's minds and see if their suffering is reduced directly, right? So that's the ultimate.
And there's flow-through effects. So for example, like I think that, so there's the poor meat eater problem, which is the idea that if you help somebody who's in poverty and then they go on to eat more factory farmed animals, does this increase suffering?
Oh wow.
Yeah. Oh, and it sucks. And like people tend to think like, oh no, but like it's fine because poor people, they often don't have access to factory farmed animals. Like they'll just be eating animals in their backyard or whatever. That's like true to a certain extent. But we've had like a bunch of people go and do actual calculations on this and do the research, and it's like, oh, it doesn't look good. Yeah. It does not look good. And also, a lot of the animals they keep in the backyard, they do not treat very nicely either.
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, chickens are actually surprisingly fine. Chickens are usually, if they're in a factory farm, that's like the worst.
Yeah.
But in like the developing world, that's often actually pretty good. They just wander around.
The poultry extreme there is pretty wide, but for cattle.
Like often with cattle, they'll just lock them in the backyard and not let them interact with other cows, and just like they stand in their own filth all day, and you're like, oh, this is like not great.
It's even worse, because not only are they going to be live to die, they're living more miserable existences as well. So
exactly.
It had never occurred to me that dynamic before, because there's clearly there are trades to be made, and you have to say, at some point, the trolley problem, so to speak, come up of evaluating like how many human lives versus how many cow lives or chicken lives or whatever, and like how do you measure the qualities there?
Exactly.
But actually that will come up regardless, because even if you're like, okay, I don't care about this trade-off upfront at all, I'm just going to improve human lives, turns out you might actually add in a whole bunch of much more suffering in another form, and you've just actually just shifted it somewhere else.
Exactly. And so like I'm of the opinion that like I'm not even sure if AMF is net positive.
Okay.
And so like that puts me in like a weird situation. Right. And then with animal rights, you're thinking like, oh, maybe it's clearer there. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. So there's the small animal replacement problem, which is that a lot of times what happens is if you do, this is less of the case now because like they're doing more like cage-free campaigns and stuff like that. But back when in the early days when I was there, they're doing more veg outreach. And they're trying to convince people to go vegetarian or vegan. The thing is that a lot of times when you go and tell people about how bad it is in factory farms, what they do is they give up all meat except for fish. And fish is some of the highest suffering density of all the animals. Yeah. Because like if you, like for example, salmon, if you have one salmon, like they're carnivorous. They actually eat other fish. Right. So like one fillet of salmon has like, last I looked at it, and like super rough, like you're actually causing like the suffering of 40 fish. With one fillet. Okay. That's massive.
Because that salmon that you're eating is then being replaced in the wild, which means that there's another...
Oh, so this is farm
just
salmon.
Just purely for farm salmon? Okay.
So this is farm salmon. So wild animals is like a wild caught fish is a totally other different thing. But like, like if you get farmed fish,
then they're fed other fish.
Exactly.
And so you literally, per life form, much higher impact.
Exactly. And like, so it can actually make it so that doing veg outreach might be net negative on animal welfare.
Because it pushes people to pescatarianism.
Exactly.
Wow.
And you're like, for goodness sake. This is really hard.
I mean, that's hard enough as like an individual to try and weigh up like what decisions you're going to make, because you're also factoring in your own health and energy levels and all of that when you make these choices. And what you can afford. And so like now you're throwing in this whole thing of like, how do we kind of like, it's smaller fish like less capable of suffering than larger fish, and there's this whole thing about like, krill and things like that. And, at what level does it weigh? It's so much to think about, and that's the part I think that becomes really overwhelming. And then if you're doing that for your job, even more so.
Yeah, exactly. So like I felt like basically what happened for me is that like I first started off like, my first beginning of ethical career was doing totally random things. It was like, I was like 19, so I was into anarchism because, everybody goes through one of those phases. Yeah. And so I volunteered at the anarchist bookstore. Probably was net neutral at best, so that's like fine. And then like I kept learning new things about what was happening, like about how the world worked and everything. And then I'd update, right? So I like find out like, this crucial consideration. Oh, okay, I should pivot, right? And the first few times it happened, I remember we actually, so I was one of the ones who ran the first RCT in the animal rights community. So this is the one that was like on leafleting. So we actually went and tested it out because at the time Brian Tomasic had done these like calculations saying it seemed pretty good. And we're like, let's actually test it.
Yeah,
so we just launched the RCT. Again, it's one of those things that you could just do this. I think people think that you have to have like a PhD or something before you can do a study. There's no
print a bunch of leaflets, randomly assign to different targets, and follow up and see what happens. Yeah,
exactly. Like you don't need permission to do most things.
That's actually such an underrated statement. You don't need permission to do most things, and I think more people need to realize that and like deeply feel that, not just hear that. Because for me, I've heard that many times before, but there've been a few times in my life where I've deeply felt that. It's been someone specifically said it to me in some specific context, and that was the huge difference. So it's very nice having salient examples like this, because there's probably a bunch of people who might listen to this who would think, we need an RCT on some topic.
Yeah.
And just never did it because you need to be affiliated or whatever, and then actually no, you don't.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could set that up as a thing on my website or something. I've been thinking of putting up like basically a Calendly link saying like, hey, if you want to start something, you can just like book a time with me here. I could just like, people could book a time with me and I can say like, hey, you don't need permission.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that would actually be immensely high value. Surprisingly so, like it just being told that directly by one person.
Yeah. And I think like right now the EA community has gone too far in like a particular direction of asking for permission, of like epistemic modesty, of saying like, oh, hey, like before you do anything, you have to make sure that like everybody agrees it's good, and you have to get like sign off from all these people. And like, sure, like you should check and make sure that like some smart people aren't saying like, hey, don't do this thing, it'll explode everything, right? But like, okay, so like when I first got into AI safety, so I'd been in near-termism up until about 2 years ago, and then I switched to long-termism, and I came in and I was like, I want to do all these things. And then I felt like, there's like that scientific experiment where like, there's a whole bunch of monkeys in a room and there's like a pile of bananas. But whenever the monkeys try and touch the bananas, they get sprayed with water. Yeah. And so then a new monkey comes in and all of the monkeys are like, no, you can't touch the banana, right? I felt like that. I felt like the new monkey coming in. I saw this giant pile of bananas and I was like, ooh, let's go. And then all the monkeys were like, don't.
Yeah.
But then what I did, so I was like, okay, I'm going to listen. I'm going to like pay attention to the fact that all the senior monkeys are telling me don't touch the bananas. Yeah. But instead of saying, oh, I'm not going to touch the bananas, I said, okay, I'm going to go ask people why they think this. I'm going to figure out why. I'm going to read all the articles. I'm going to do the research, right? And then I'm going to form my own opinion. And then if I think that, okay, yeah, actually I agree. Yeah. I shouldn't touch the bananas.
Because you get sprayed with water. Then like, okay, that makes sense. That checks out.
Exactly. But then sometimes like, I read it and like, so for example, with the, one of the first things that came up was unilateralist curse. Like people were like, oh no, they were super worried. And so I looked into it and I was like, oh, like, yeah, but there's a solution to this. You just go and ask a few people who are smart and informed, hey, what do you think of this? And if a sufficient number of them are like fine with it, or at least like not saying don't do it, then you can. Yeah. It's solved. This is a solved problem. We don't have to act as if there's this big scary thing that we don't know if we're going to mess it up or not. It's like we can just ask people. And same with like Infohazards, I was looking into that and I was like, okay, there are some things that like clearly these are Infohazards.
Do you have favorite examples there? Because I'm always looking for a clean example of an Infohazard, like the existence proof for at least one Infohazard.
Well, okay, so you don't want to say the Infohazards that are actually Infohazards that are currently active Infohazards, because then
that is also by definition no.
But I actually had some people look into this, and if you just go onto the EA forum and look at my thing, you can see like there's like a article I posted about Infohazards, and there's like a giant list I added there of examples of Infohazards that are like safe. Yeah. So I can't remember.
They're not Infohazards to the people reading them.
Yeah, and like the classic example was saying that you could poison, like you could put poison in Tylenol bottles. Okay. Like this is before they had put the safety seal on. Right. And basically before nobody had ever thought to add poison to random pharmacy like drugs and stuff, right? Like they're like, why would you do that? Yeah. And then one person did it apparently. I forget if this is like this is like apocryphal or not, but then when one person did it, it went into the news, and then tons of people started doing it.
So knowing that it can be done is an info hazard, because suddenly with that information, a lot more people are going to be doing this very negative thing.
Exactly. So like that was the thing. But I also think like an important part of that story is that then we developed safety seals. Yeah. And then it was fine. Yeah. So like, and I think that there are a lot of things like that as well, where it's like, and we're not going to develop those safety precautions unless we talk about it. Yeah.
That's why it's always a tricky thing, because in almost all cases, more information is better. And the rationalist EA types are very much about like, find the truth, understand, what is true is already so, you just don't yet know it and believe it, but you should. And so Infohazards are where it gets like really weird at the boundaries there.
Exactly. And also on the other hand, I actually think like I haven't come up with the best name for it yet. I think I'm like right now my best name for it is the altruist's advantage. So it's kind of the opposite of the Infohazard, where it's like so in the suffering risk community, the S-risk community, which is way harder to say out loud. It's very clear in writing.
It works beautifully in text. Yeah.
So in the S-risk community, there's like this concern about creating, like they think it's an info-hazard to apologize to anybody who thinks this is still an info-hazard. I'm going to talk about it anyways. Yeah. So there's this idea of that, like Pascal's mugging, right? Somebody comes up to you and says like, hey, I'm going to cause like a bajillion suffering unless you give me $5. And the thing is like right now that's just a thought experiment. But in the future, when we have superintelligences, this is actually a thing that could happen. Yeah. Like a superintelligence, an aligned superintelligence could be threatened by an unaligned superintelligence, by like the unaligned superintelligence saying, I'm going to go simulate a bajillion suffering unless you give me what I want. And so they're trying to figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen, or how to make sure that they don't capitulate or something. It's a really important research agenda. I think that like the people who are doing that, that's fantastic. We should definitely be working on that. The thing is like they're like, oh, we shouldn't talk about it too much. We shouldn't make it very emotionally salient. They're actively trying to make it so that their public materials are less interesting, so that it doesn't become this info hazard where people hear about it and then make it more likely. And so I have a few responses to that, and I've talked to them about this. So so one of them is that right now, if you're like a malevolent or an indifferent person, and you want to threaten people to get people to do things. Imagine I'm this malevolent person. I want to get the most I can out of the president or something.
Yeah.
I go up to the president. I say, President, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to simulate a bajillion suffering. First off, he's going to be like, you can't.
Yeah.
Right? And then even if I could, he's not going to care.
Yeah.
Why would they care? Come back to me when you have like an identifiable victim. I want to see like a little girl who's like tied up in a chair. That will get me to do something. Not like some artificial sentient beings. Like they're not.
The tiny probabilities involved with like Pascal's mugging type scenarios that make it dangerous to Bayesian agents thinking about these things don't apply to someone who runs a country.
Exactly.
There's like just some threshold below which it's like it's so unlikely that it's not worth their time.
And even if it was, say we do have simulation machines now that can do it.
Yeah.
They're not going to care. They're not going to care about digital beings because they're regular humans. They're not EAs. EAs are going to care.
Yeah.
You can maybe threaten an EA, but even a lot of EAs won't care. They're going to be like, no, I don't know if it's sentient. Where's your proof?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So
unless those sentient minds had votes, then the politicians would care. But other than that,
it's like utility monsters. We can have voting monsters. You can just create enough voters. So like it's not useful for a malevolent agent right now.
Yeah.
Until the point where we're actually already at where we have super intelligences.
Yeah.
And if you're a super intelligence, you are going to think of this in 2 seconds.
It's going to be immediately obvious.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is not going to be this thing where we have to be worried that the super intelligence will figure out to use threats.
Yeah, exactly.
This is like pretty basic, obvious things.
Yeah.
Like if we can think of it, a super intelligence is going to think of it. And so right now it's actually like, and this is where the altruistic advantage comes in, where it's like malevolent people aren't going to be interested in this. The only people who are going to be interested in this are altruistic people who are trying to prevent something in the future.
Right.
Because if you're a malevolent person, you don't care about trying to threaten somebody 50 years from now in some uncertain future.
Yeah.
You care about threatening somebody right now.
Yeah.
And there's way better tools. And so we actually have this like period of time, for an indifferent period of time, where we're going to have the advantage. We're the only people interested. We can make tons of progress. We can be making progress on making the safety seals on Tylenol bottles before anybody even thinks to put poison in there.
Right.
And so we should actually be talking about this way more and spreading it way more. The terrorists don't care. There are some Infohazards that definitely do what, don't mention some things in like biotech.
That's always an area where I'm like, because there are definitely things that if you knew them would radically change how people behave in the world in dangerous ways. It's like this class of thing that's considered an Infohazard by some people that's then actually not like the Infohazard is the meta. It's the belief that those things are an Infohazard because that stops people from actually talking about them enough to make productive.
Well, it's not quite an Infohazard, but it is a block. It's basically
it's just in general. Like, so I like how you phrase it of like the altruist advantage. There's a bunch of things that only well-intentioned, well-meaning people who care about solving the problem will care about for the majority of the time up front before it becomes actually dangerous enough that it's viable for malevolent actors. I love that. That's a really interesting lens to start throwing at potentially risky problems. Do you think that applies to most of kind of AI safety at the moment?
Not quite. I think capabilities is already, like for AI generally, there's like a very clear reason to build it up. Not if you're malevolent necessarily, although also malevolent. Like I think that if I was an evil government, I would definitely be interested in AI. I'd be like, that seems like there's already use cases for it. It's already useful. Yeah. And so it's much closer to that point where that's gonna we don't want to be talking necessarily about how great AI is and how powerful it is or could be, because I do think that that's the sort of thing that could get people. Yeah. I mean, I think the cat's already out of the bag there. It's already pretty powerful. It's pretty obvious. EAs are not going to move the needle on that, so I'm not super concerned.
At the moment, it almost seems to be like an altruist advantage in the way that the people who are able to use these tools and put them together in a way that actually works have generally invested a lot of their life and education and work into building these systems and publishing that or utilizing them to generate revenue or something that's at least benign. And so but as soon as you get state actors involved there, it becomes dangerous. I often have to find myself being like, oh, that new technology and that new technology that just was released now, like, oh, if we just stuck this to that and then I'm like, shut up. Definitely don't tweet that. So there are definitely, and this has changed so much in the last 4 or 5 years. The explosion in capabilities since, I guess, GPT. I mean, my views on this update on like a monthly basis, and how our timelines are looking for the scary stuff. So it's a tough one to be looking into and to be thinking about and to be trying to enact positive change. And I think also maybe you had a similar experience like with the world's reaction to COVID, particularly from organizations and leaders that are supposed to be dealing with these kind of things that, you know, are in everyone's interest. I mean, the response was so dismal that it just really, you lose all confidence that there are any adults in charge for, even for things that like we know what they are and what we can do about them. When you're talking about AGI or alignment, I mean, that might not even be solvable at all. So it's very, very hard to feel optimistic about that.
Something to help me. So when I first heard the simulation argument, it was like around 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
I remember thinking like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But like, it's probably wrong somehow. I don't know why. Yeah. So I basically like on the face value, I was like, I believe this like 99%, but I just like put it down to like 50% just because like probably my reasoning went wrong somewhere. Sure. So it was around 50% chance around a simulation. But I was thinking, well, like what are the implications of that? Doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna live my life as I would anyways. I did that for a long time. Then 2 years ago, right in the middle of like the beginning of COVID, I was like, wait a second. There's no way that I'm just probably wrong about everything and it has no implications whatsoever.
Right.
So I spent like a whole month basically just like obsessively thinking about the simulation hypothesis.
Yeah.
And just generating a million different reasons why you might make this simulation or any simulation at all, and thinking about the implications. And one of the implications that I'm not sure if this will cross-apply to anybody, so but this is at least work for me, is that like I just feel way happier. Because, so a few things. One, so maybe AGI kills us all, right? Yeah. But like there's a 50% chance I'm in a simulation. And the simulation actually could just be pretty new. Could be that it was made like 2 seconds ago. Yeah. Or it could be small. It's gonna end in like 2 seconds already anyways for other reasons. It just all of a sudden becomes, it's much more likely that it's a small simulation. So if this is base reality, then the universe is massive. If this is a simulation, there's a decent probability that either it's conditionally rendered and only things I'm looking at are around, or that it's like relatively small. It could actually just be like the reason why there's like empty space forever is because they just stopped. There's like
It's just like background texture.
Yeah. Exactly. There's all sorts of things, right? So it just becomes like much less likely that something is bad. Also, if this is base reality and everything looks and like I'm an atheist, I'm a determinist or a like reductionist, whatever. Yeah. So I'm like, well, you know, I'm just a bunch of atoms. But if we're in a simulation, there's at least some possibility. I mean, it could be that the simulation is like a hydrogen simulator. It explains why there's so much hydrogen.
Yeah.
But it could also be that this is a simulation that is somehow related to me. Like it becomes much more likely that that's the case. And then all of a sudden I have this possibility that I am somehow important or special. And that's really nice.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect on it. That knowing that something must have created the simulation means that there's a higher chance that you're actually deliberately there. Yeah. And observed and known and meaningful in some other way that you wouldn't otherwise be in just the base reality, cold, dark universe.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And then there's other things too. So like all of a sudden there's all these things like, and you can update based on your own experience, right? Yeah. So I can look at my life and be like, well, you know, maybe I'm being simulated because I actually play a role in bringing about an aligned AGI. And this is like a biography of Kat, who was like involved with bringing about like a benevolent superintelligence. Okay. Like people would want to read about that. Yeah. And so it makes it more likely that I'm going to win, which feels nice.
All right. Yeah. So those definitely like boost your confidence and mood for sure. Yeah. And that's like, so doing a month of navel gazing about the simulation hypothesis turns out to be very productive. Yeah. Because you can then utilize the kind of positive emotions and things that come from that to actually go do things within what is either the world or a simulation.
Yeah. Cool. Other things that have kind of been like a positive thing from that. I mean, all these things are low probabilities, right? Like most of if we're in a simulation, most of the probabilities probability mass is in, I don't know why this simulation exists.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, it's probably some super weird thing. They're just like maximizing leptons or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know, there's some probability as well. Like this is one of those things that just makes me feel happier and makes me act better. Which is, I think, well, what if we've already developed a superintelligence?
Yeah.
And it is currently trying to figure out what it should do. It's trying to figure out human values, and we're the training data. Like it's training on us. It's looking at us and it's trying to learn like what value should I have. And so I think it's almost like, what if the superintelligence is watching right now? How should I behave in such a way that it would like learn the right values?
Yeah.
If you believe you're in a simulation, and like whatever probability you put, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think like anybody who's rational should put I think that if you put lower than a 1% chance, like I think that you're just like wrong, and I'm willing to like debate you on that.
Yeah.
Like I think it should, like, I mean, obviously I think it should be 50%, because
right.
I'm obviously correct. But,
but between like 1 and 99%, you're pretty happy that the person gets it enough. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Mostly though, I still have the thing of like, well, we're just going to develop an AGI and then it'll figure it out. So if we are in a simulation, I still want to create a superintelligence, which will figure out either how to get us out or get the simulation to be better. Because like, if the simulation is what it looks like factory farming is just unacceptable. Like that should not be the thing. Like global poverty, what the fuck? Like what are we doing? Like if there's a simulator that can just adjust the settings, like we should, obviously.
Absolutely.
And so, but like a superintelligence is better able to figure that out.
Right.
Than we are. So there you go. So it still all comes back to superintelligence.
That's a great kind of branch of optimism that most people will never consider. That's a really interesting flourish to put on it.
Yeah. Another one that's like a weird way of feeling optimistic is, so if you are a determinist, I think like free will doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can have like the compatibilism thing, but that's like, so there's this great SMBC comic about compatibilism, which is it shows like this mom talking to her kid, and she says, hey, do you want to go see dinosaurs? And the kid's like, yeah, I want to see dinosaurs. And they go and see some chickens, and the mom's like, ha, see, chickens are technically dinosaurs. And the kid's like, oh, well, you knew what I meant. Like, I didn't want to see chickens. And then the next panel is Daniel Dennett's the guy who's super compatibilist. Like he goes and talks to this philosophy student and says, hey, you can have determinism and free will. And then he explains compatibilism, and he's like, but that's not what I meant. You know that.
Exactly.
And like, so anyways, even if you're compatibilist, it still makes sense of there's no other way things that could have been. And so I take comfort in this. So say like we do everything we can and we still all die. There is actually nothing else you could have done.
Yeah.
In like a very real and important sense, like a foundational sense, you could ever do what you could have done.
And so you can't really blame yourself.
Yeah.
It's still okay.
Yeah, and so you should still try it, right? Like it's still one of those things where it's like, okay, like I don't blame criminals for doing what they do, but I still think we should put them in jail as like a preventative measure for other people, or like taking them off the streets if they're going to continue committing crimes. And likewise, we should still try and make sure that AGI doesn't kill us all or torture us all. But like also, like at the end of the day, there's no like, you couldn't have done anything else. And so like the lack of free will can actually make you happier.
But we have this very important instrumental illusion of free will and agency and the ability to do things. And like that's a really important thing, as we were speaking about earlier, to cultivate. Yeah. So there's this amazing duality to that, of this instrumental split in like, okay, I think this is actually true. And that gives me one way to be kind of optimistic and more kind to myself about things. But in the other way, you know, I believe that I should be agentic and try and do things and go out there and actually create things. And it's a very active thing, even though that's predetermined to some extent.
Yeah, like the feeling of choosing to do things doesn't, you know, it's not actually free will, it's just the feeling of doing things. Yeah.
Which is, it's just amazing juxtaposition there, but that's the reality we inhabit. I'd be interested to hear a little bit about what you are kind of actively working on at the moment in terms of your stuff with Nonlinear. You also, not that long ago, started Nonlinear Library, which is audio versions of, is it everything on Less Wrong ultimately? Is that the goal? Or is it
so that's like the goal eventually. We haven't got around to it. It's just like a bunch of like, you know, little things. But so like right now what it does, the Nonlinear Library just automatically turns all of the top content on the EA forum, Less Wrong, and Alignment forum into a podcast form. Yeah. And so you can just like automatically get it all in your podcast player. Yeah.
What was the decision behind that? Because most people wouldn't have gone with that. It's generally still considered that it's nicer to have a human narrator. And then there's like the problems of like technical articles with a lot of math notation or tables or diagrams.
Yeah.
So what was the thought process behind that?
I mean, so like, I remember I was talking to somebody from Less Wrong. We were talking about doing all the backlog, and he was thinking like, oh, we should do it like where we do a human. And I was like, okay, sure, try it. But like super back of the envelope calculation, it would take years, multiple people working full time, and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Whereas to do it with an AI costs like $10,000, will take you a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's like pretty fucking good. I mean, like humans are great. I love listening to humans. I definitely prefer humans over robots.
Yeah. But robots are better than nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the trade.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And so like if I had gotten a person, and it would have been, so like my big thing is passive impact. So like passive income, but for impact. And I was like, well, if I start with humans, I'm going to have to either incubate it and like have it run somebody else, and that's going to take up a whole bunch of humans' time, or I can just make a robot do it. And it's like, it's still generating in the background. I don't do anything with it anymore. Yeah. And it's still like, we have like 40 episodes a week or something crazy.
Yeah, that just pumps out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even if we had humans, if we wanted to do all of the ones that we wanted to do, it would take so many people. It would take a whole organization working full time. And it's like, man, like we have better things to do.
Yeah. And you'd still face the same problems with the notation and the figures and whatever.
Exactly. And so, and like my big thing is, like I wanted to set it up so it could run without me. This is like a great way. Machines like are one of the best ways to automate things, obviously. And yeah, I mean, I originally built it for myself. Like I was like, I really want to just have this because I have like a bunch of difficulties trying to like get things to listen. I have a whole system now for like how to turn everything into audio.
Oh, awesome. I'd be super interested to know about that. Because I've just been using Pocket for years, which has a pretty good text-to-speech reader. And as you get more familiar with it, you get better at kind of following it. But that's all happening kind of on device. It's like, it's not ideal. It still gets some things wrong. Yeah. So you've got a more elaborate system that gets better quality.
Yeah, I'm going to publish the articles soon. I can share the doc with you, and maybe by the time this will be my kick in the butt to publish it.
Out. Yeah, well, then it'll definitely be in the show notes. But I'm super interested in that. So so it's very much like a tactical decision that came off something you had done for yourself anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And then since then it's evolved. We've got like a bunch of things. We've got now it's like because the main channel is it's very high volume. Like just tons of stuff comes out all the time. So we've set up like ones where you can just have like one episode daily or one episode per week if that's what you want.
And then who cherry picks which episodes those
are? It's done automatically. So it's just like based off of, I think the algorithm was something like whatever's the top upvoted of the last 24 hours, and just pick that one.
Really cool.
Again, automatic. No humans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Really cool.
So we did that. Another thing that we put out recently was the EA houses. This is meant to be kind of like the Airbnb of EA.
Right. I saw that, but I didn't get a chance to look into it. So what's the idea behind that?
Yeah. So the idea behind that is basically that if anybody has spare space, they can turn that into impact by having EAs come and live with them and then do stuff. And that can be almost like a decentralized EA hotel, where you can just have like a bunch of people, and like it's almost like renting to give or something. Like, hey, if you have the space. And this originally came about because me and my partner have this house, and we're only going to be there for like 3 to 6 months of the year, and the rest of the year it's going to be empty, and we can't rent it out. And we're like, well, let's just turn this into impact. Like, let's just have a whole bunch of people come live here and do EA stuff with like.
So instead of just turning it into like currency by Airbnb it normally, and then trying to allocate that currency, you're just cutting out that whole intermediate step.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah, and so and we're hoping like other people can do that as well. So like there's a whole bunch of people there. You have different like things, like so some people put it there that they're just looking for roommates and it's actually like costing money. Other people are like look like us who have spare space and we're like, yeah, you can just stay here for free for a very long time. Okay. And then some people are like, oh, this is couch surfing. You can stay here for a couple days. And and so we put out that's like really easy. We just like put a really simple thing out there. We're like maybe gonna make it better, but like that was just kind of like, hey, this should obviously exist.
That's great.
Yeah, and then the big things that I'm working on right now are so one, this is like the working title is like the Nonlinear Support Fund, but we might call it something different. But the general idea behind this is that make it so that we remove the need, like so. The way I kind of think of AI safety strategy is we've got two things. We've got so we need to figure out the answer to how to create a safe AGI sometime in the next year to 100 years or so on certain timelines. How do we maximize the chance that we get that answer in time? And there's two broad ways I see to do that. One, get more researchers on it, right? And the other is make better use of the researchers we currently have. And so I think we should obviously do both. both is better. So this particularly works on how do we make the best, like how do we like empower and enable the existing safety researchers to do their best work.
Okay.
And so support fund is basically just the idea of whatever people could plausibly use to increase their productivity, we'll just pay for. Wow. And we'll have a really simple decision metric. Like we're not exactly sure what it's going to be yet, but like the basic idea is to have something simple like, oh, hey, we're just going to rely on like a trust network in terms of like, hey, if you've already received funding from any of these trusted funding sources, like they've already vetted you. You're already high impact.
Yeah.
We can just give you money now for like, you know, things like, I mean, like the two basic ones are therapy and coaching. Like coaching just can help you get through like a lot of the stuff. You just need some help figuring out how to be like more productive and like actually have somebody following up with you every week. Therapy obviously makes sense. It's really especially good for burnout and stuff like that. But there's like all sorts of other things like sad lamps, air conditioning. Like recently we had a heat wave in Europe and people just don't have AC.
And the buildings are insulated to hell and high water. It was insane.
And like just getting AC for people. Tutoring for ML stuff, that just seems like a really no-brainer for a lot of people. So just anything like that. And we're also going to set up, we're going to be experimenting with having essentially kind of like FTX regranters, but for the support fund.
Okay.
So there'll just be people going around and trying to find people who need help and then just giving it to them.
Really interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so this is a way, again, to decentralize. I'm a big fan of decentralizing and trying more things. I think right now the EA movement is like, we need to be experimenting with way more stuff. Yeah. We need to be moving faster. We could be in a short timeline horizon. And if we are going to die or be tortured for forever. These are like, we need to move faster.
No pressure, folks. But doesn't sound like fun.
No, exactly. So like we need to move a bit faster. And the thing is that I think people have this thing of like, be cautious. And I agree. But the thing is what does it mean to be cautious? You know, if we're going straight towards a cliff, is it cautious to sit down and think really carefully about whether we should turn the wheel or not? Like, no.
You really need to just make the turn or find the brakes.
Yeah,
or something.
Exactly. Try a bunch of things. You need to try a bunch of things really fast because you're about to die. Yeah. And it could be that it's still another 50 years out. So we don't want to do things that are much more likely to cause like, so my kind of thinking is that if we are in a short timeline place and we only do long timeline things, we're dead. If we're in a long timeline world, but we act on short timelines, we still have time to figure out the long timelines later, right? Like, so as long as we don't do things that like shoot ourselves in the foot right now, right? So like, I don't recommend like committing acts of terror. Like that would really hurt our ability to help it in the future, right? So don't, let it be on the record. Kat says no acts of terror. But like most of these things are not like that. Most of these things like are not going to hurt our long-term prospects. And like, I also get delegating epistemic authority if we're in a situation where we know what to do, if the epistemic authorities know what to do. And like, I have nothing but respect for all of the major funders. Like, I think they're fantastic. I think they're some of the smartest and most values-aligned people. I love that about the EA community. Yeah. But they're probably wrong about most things, like everybody in the community. And so like, it's not like they're like if Nick Beckstead or Holden says that this thing is good, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. And like, I love these guys. These guys are great. But like, we don't know. Nobody knows.
That's just trust and authority at this point. On pure reputation, but actually doing the experiments, getting the data, playing with a bunch of stuff is going to be what's necessary to figure out where everything goes. Because most of us can't predict the future more than 6 months in advance with any reliability anyway.
Exactly, let alone for something like AI safety. Yeah. And it also depends on where your default is. So if you think that the default outcome is good, and say you're like 99% chance, like if AGI is developed this year, it's going to be fine. Yeah. Right? Then there's more ways to mess it up than there are ways to make it better. Yes. So you should be more cautious. Like, or cautious in terms of like acting. But most people are not acting under that assumption. There's very few people who are super optimistic if it happens in the next year or 5 years, that's going to go well. And like most people have the strong default that actually it's going to be quite bad if we continue in our status quo direction. And I think that's correct. And then that means that it's not, I'm not saying like, oh, hey, just like do whatever comes to mind immediately, right? Like again, check with like smart people and see what they think. But also there's way more ways for it to go, like if you, like in expectation, if you have somebody who's smart and trying to do things, like in expectation, it's going to make it better rather than worse.
Or have no effect. But
or have, that's a heavy default. We could be also in a simulation, so it's okay.
Always good to remember.
So anyways, like I really like this idea of decentralizing things. That's what I love about FTX.
Yeah.
They've just like gone and given it to a whole bunch of regranters. I want to do that for everything.
Okay. Awesome.
Speaking of which is the next thing. So we have that support fund. We're going to be publishing that soon. And then the other thing is the bounty platform.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so this is like, or we're maybe calling it as a prize platform. Like, again, we're still figuring out the names. But the idea is to, so originally we're like, oh yeah, we should make bounties. Bounties are fantastic because you just put up the money and you only pay out if somebody does the thing you want. So there you go, it's perfect. And so I had a whole bunch of interns working on this where we generated like hundreds of ideas and like found all these different things and we're trying to compare them. And then the thing that just filtered to the top as the best bounty was to let other people make the bounties.
The natural conclusion of make it a two-way market.
Exactly. And so we got a bunch of funding from SFF and we're actually working on setting that up so that we're going to have a whole bunch of bounty regranters who can then go and make their own bounties, promote them, specify them and everything. And then if they do well, then we'll give them more money to give out more bounties and so forth. And
so the funding for the bounty is coming from you guys via your funding. They're not having to float the money themselves.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is the thing. So they can be anyone who's just well-versed in a topic and has identified something that would be useful. And then there's some kind of reputation mechanism or something there as well. Exactly.
And then the other thing too that I'm excited about this is that we'll make the bounties, but then other people can top them up if they think it's good and it's underpriced.
Okay.
Right? So like say you're going through this list of bounties, you're like, man, that's fantastic, but that's like only got $1,000 prize on it. That should definitely be 10,000. Like I'm going to add 9,000 to make it 10,000.
Right.
And then you can start having price signals in the movement too of that's like, you can just imagine it, like if you're trying to contribute and you're like, okay, I care about AI safety. This is really important to me. Now what? You can go to this giant list of bounties and you can just sort by like how much money there is or whatever, or like all sorts of things.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's like then you effectively will have a decision market going on there to not only just allocate the funds, but also to decide where they're best allocated and what the price to allocate for it is. So that's and then like your favorite thing, that's all being done kind of automatically for you, in this case by a decentralized community as opposed to a bunch of AI on a server somewhere. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
All right, so that's like the next big thing too.
Exactly. And I also really like it because it gives also a way. So one group of people are going to be just like random people who do it, right? And it's fantastic. We're getting these people counterfactually to do stuff. The other group of people I think will do a lot of bounty hunting is people who are new, who this is like right now if you want to get an EA job or work in EA, there's like this small number of jobs, small number of internships, ridiculously competitive, so hard to get in. With the bounties, there's going to be another way to get in and to prove yourself if you have no background. Because like there's no, again, you don't need permission to go bounty hunting.
It's
you can
totally
just go.
Permissionless. You can just go do it. So if something's up there for a few $1,000s and you're like, I can do this in a month or two, but you've got no prior experience, you go, you do it, you get that funding that allows you to solve the problem. But then you've also got the credibility when it comes to later getting involved at higher levels.
Exactly. Awesome. So you can like list that on your application or your CV of saying like, hey, I won this prize, that prize for like these things or whatever.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And being a bounty hunter, that's a great title. Effective altruist bounty hunter. That's great. I love that.
Yeah. And I'm thinking it can also be something that people can do in EA groups. So like I think right now there's basically just like you read and you discuss things. Maybe you do a fundraiser or something, or like try and do community building. But this can be a whole other thing you can do. You can imagine like once a week or once a month or something, you do like a bounty hunting session where you sit down and like as a group you try and get some of the bounties.
That would be awesome. I love that idea. That's really exciting.
Yeah. And then finally the last one that we're working on, but this is going to be like a bit further out, just because a bunch of things is this is kind of related. The current working title for it is the idea market.
Okay. And
the idea behind that is to, again, decentralize everything. This is ideally to just replace everything that Nonlinear kind of wants to do in terms of incubation, where it'll be a giant list of ideas that anybody can add to, and anybody can like add criticisms or like, upvotes or whatever to the ideas. But then the key thing is that it will automatically filter through a few mechanisms. One is that potential funders can go through and say which ideas they'd be interested in funding if the right person started it. And then we also have that with mentors, saying like, hey, I'd be willing to mentor this if the right person started it. Right. And then of course, we're EAs. There's going to be a prediction market. And so that you can have a prediction for what ideas you think will get funded or get started. We'll have to figure out exactly like the thing, but probably it'll be funding based. And so then you can go through, like say you're again new to EA, you're like, what do I do? You can actually go and have this thing where you're like, oh hey, like, and this gets past the unilateralist curse thing, because you can see, oh hey, this idea has already been like approved by a bunch of really like, informed high status people in the community.
Right. Okay. So that's already can be baked into it before people even get involved at that level.
Exactly.
Really nice.
And then we're going to have like other things. We're going to have ways to filter by like how long this would take. So like there'll be some things where it's like, oh hey, this just takes like a couple weeks,
right?
And so it'll like be easy. There's other things where it's like, oh hey, you have to commit to like at least 5 years for this to have any chance of working, or like this needs technical skills. This doesn't need technical skills. You can be a newbie. You have to be an established person to do this. All that sort of stuff. So there's this thing called Nomad List. It's a website where basically you can search for cities by like all these different features, and it's like the best spreadsheet essentially on the planet.
Exactly.
And I kind of want that for EA ideas.
Perfect, because otherwise everyone would have to go do that on their own, then run those ideas by, you'd have to go see, okay, what is important to me? What do I think? Do all that analysis and work up front, pick something, then pitch it. So it's like, it's just way too redundant and inefficiently done. This, you're crowdsourcing that, collecting all that information. The way it's collected is inherently giving it all the characteristics you need to filter and search and sort.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I love that.
Yeah. And hopefully that will just actually make it so we don't even need nonlinear. Again, I'm always trying to replace myself. I think like sometimes when people discover counterfactuals, they're like, shit, like this just makes everything worse. And like, to be fair, counterfactuals do make everything worse. It kind of sucks. But one of the positive things about it is that it, for me, like I just go around and I just try and replace myself right from the get-go. Like, I'm always trying to design things so they don't need me. And this is a way to make it so nonlinear is not even needed. We can just create this thing, and then people can find the ideas, they can find the funding, they can find the mentorship, and
there you go.
Yeah, and then I can go, well, I'm not going to retire because...
But you can do something else. And that's the thing. That's such a brilliant inversion, because normally, especially in the for-profit kind of sector, you've got to have that whole vision of where it's going to go, and you pivot and you do everything to keep the company intact, even if the vision and all of that is lost. And you have to be about getting the revenue eventually. Whereas when you're doing stuff with nonprofit, you can totally have that inversion because you care about the outcome. You don't care about necessarily being the one to do it.
Exactly.
And so that's brilliant. That having that mindset and then acting on that must be really kind of liberating in a way, because it clears up the path, and you have a really good signal of when something is a good idea, because it makes your thing that you needed to do in the past redundant, which seems like a good progress signal.
Exactly.
Which I love. That's great.
Yeah, and it fits well with like I think some people really like if they switch too often and do different things, then it's really stressful for them. They really want to feel mastery. They want to like specialize in something. And then there's a whole bunch of people, and I think a lot of EAs fall into this category of they have a lot of interests and they lose interest quickly too. And setting up passive impact, where you're trying to replace yourself, actually works with that. It allows you to be a generalist, and that's a good thing. Yeah. Like you're like, oh hey, you're gonna lose. Like one of my favorite things. So like one of my unofficial like goals in life is to be like the Tim Ferriss of EA.
Oh, very cool. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah. I mean, technically Tim Ferriss is an EA, but he's like kind of not. Like he only did that one post once, and so like I don't know. I'm taking this title until he comes and grabs it from me. So.
Soils.
Like he said, he had this quote that I really loved. He said, "Interests wane, design accordingly."
Beautiful.
Yeah, and so I have I've just been like, okay, like I could try and like focus on something and really like focus on it for 10 years straight, but like it's not going to happen. Right. I'll suffer so much. This is a way that actually not only is it good, but it's actually like it could be better than the other thing, because now I can set up a whole bunch of things, step back. Like I mean, charity entrepreneurship is still running without me. Same with Charity Science Health.
The 4-hour nonprofit.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of exciting stuff coming up.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of like calls to action, any places you want to direct people that might be interested in being involved, helping out, potentially funding? I don't know.
We can always use more money. Like we can always turn it into more things. Like part of the reason we chose the Nonlinear Support Fund is I kind of want it to be the give directly of AI safety. Okay. Where it's like, hey, it's just like this thing where it's like it could just accept almost indefinite amounts of money. Yeah. And it just can keep going. And it's really robust. It's like one of those things where you're like, this is very unlikely to go wrong. Compared to pretty much anything you can do in AI safety. Right. This is just applying a multiplier to like it's an index fund of AI safety. So, so if you think that AI safety is generally good, then this is like the thing to invest in that can just like cause good things. And then also we just always are like, I mean, obviously there'll be things for more bounties, incubating more things, like the seed funding is a big source of money, all sorts of stuff. So we can always accept more money. We can always figure out ways to turn that into impact.
Great.
And then in terms of pointing people towards things, I would definitely check out the Nonlinear library. I think this is one of those things that we just need to like get more out there. It's just really great. Like I just listen to it in the morning when I wake up and I brush my teeth and everything. I just catch up on the EA forum.
Yeah.
And it's just great.
Yeah, without having to sacrifice your eyes and hands to the task. Yeah.
Exactly.
On a commute, all those things easy.
Yeah. And then, I mean, right now, you can't really check it out, but soon, I mean, we're posting it, I think, on the Bounty Rationality Facebook group right now, but soon it'll be public as well of just doing the bounties. So if you have ideas, like reach out to us. We're looking for people to be the regranters and to make those. So if you're the sort of person who wants to make them, that's fantastic.
Great.
And then what else is there? We incubated a hiring agency.
Okay.
An EA hiring agency.
Very cool.
Yeah, and so they're just getting started, and they've got like a bunch of experience hiring people. And so if you're looking to hire anybody and you're like, I don't know how to do this, or like, hiring's hard. So it's basically either if you don't know how to do it and you want help and just somebody to like help guide you and like do all the best practices, or if you're just like, oh hey, I know how to hire but I hate it,
just outsource it to someone else who's going to do a great job. Yeah,
exactly, because like they can do everything from like they can do the whole process for you if you want. They can just do parts of it. So if you don't want to do the first round interviews, they can just take all of their questions. You can just give them the interview questions and they'll just do it for you, record it. They'll just send you the best people. And yeah, so if you're an introvert, which I have noticed some EAs are,
tends to be a pattern.
Yeah, you can just delegate. So just check them out. The way to find them, so they're just going public right now. They're at EAG San Francisco. So if you're there, obviously this won't be out in time, but I mean, just reach out to Nonlinear on like the contact us form, and then we'll forward you to them. Because they're about to publish their website, but I don't think it's ready yet.
Okay.
So that's always a thing. And if you're working in long-termism and you need therapy or you need coaching or anything that could like help increase your productivity, that's what the fund is for. And that should be public pretty soon. So it'll probably be up by the time this is up. So
exciting. Yeah. I mean, all of those things will then, I'll put those in the show notes so it's easy for people to find. And I guess Nonlinear has a blog, so if you announce anything after that, that will be the place to find it.
Exactly, and the newsletter as well.
Oh, there's a newsletter as well. All right, perfect. Which is, so it's the same things, but it gets into your mailbox and therefore straight into your brain.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you can always follow me on Twitter. It's like Kat 2 underscores and then Woods.
Just to keep people on their toes.
Yeah, exactly.
I can definitely second that being a great Twitter follow. Kat's very, very interesting on Twitter and a lot of thought-provoking stuff. Yeah,
and I also accept pretty much any Facebook requests of anybody who has more than 20 mutual friends. So, you can definitely add me there as well, and I post longer things there. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for making the time to chat and for literally a ton of food for thought. It was really, really great getting to meet you in person and to just bounce some ideas around and hear what you think and what you're working on.
Yeah, and thank you for hosting me, and also for recording the replacing guilt thing. I've shared that with a bunch of people, and I didn't realize it was you until just today. And I was like, wow, thank you.
I'm glad that it's been useful. I think it's a superb piece of work. So I was like, whatever way this can be known to more people. So I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening, folks. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Kat's insights and infectious energy are truly exceptional. Now, as mentioned, links for everything we spoke about are in the show notes for this episode. You can also find them on the Bit of a Tangent website over at podtangent.com. Please do share this conversation with friends and family who might benefit from learning more about effective altruism and the initiatives Kat is working on. This podcast runs no ads and makes no revenue. We just do it to spread helpful and interesting ideas into the world, so your signal boosts are invaluable in that cause. Make sure to follow Kat Woods on Twitter, and if you're prepared for the unfiltered stream of shape rotator consciousness, you might like to follow me as well. It's where I usually go to solicit input for future episodes and where I give updates about releases. And stay tuned. There are so many exciting guests and new projects coming up. And with that, I bid you all the very best. Until next time.